Shane Phelan, the Burkes are back in the news. They're rarely out of the news in recent weeks anyway. What has got them into the headlines this time around, though?
Yeah, so a judge has ordered the imprisonment for 2 weeks of Enoch Burke's mother and sister, Martina and Ammi Burke. It all stems from their behaviour in his courtroom on February 20th, where they engaged in shouting and roaring at the top of their voice, to the extent that the hearing had to be abandoned temporarily and the Gardaí had removed them from the courtroom. They've been involved in many disturbances, Tabitha, of court proceedings over the last number of years. But this was the first time, I suppose, that a judge has kind of grasped the nettle and held them in contempt. At a hearing late last week, Mr. Justice Brian Cregan ordered their imprisonment. Interestingly, neither woman actually showed up in court for that contempt hearing ruling. And as we record this podcast, they're still at large. The guards have to still locate them.
Can you take me through the judge's comments at that time when, as you described, there was chaos in the court at that stage?
Yeah, so what the judge said was that such was the level of shouting and roaring directed at him that he simply could not be heard above the shouting. He said he tried repeatedly to ask them to sit down and to be quiet. He could not be heard over the din, as he described it, and they refused to abide by the directions of the court. He said it was a gross disruption of court proceedings and an affront to the administration of justice. And one kind of just to give you an idea of how loud and how hard it was for the judge to be heard, the judge actually, at the time, ordered their attachment, which is effectively their arrest. Now, there was lots of guards in court. This was a comment that was heard by some of us on the press benches. But then afterwards, we were kind of puzzled because the guards actually didn't arrest them. They just removed them from the court, and the Burkes were walking around outside free and easy. And the guards couldn't hear it. They couldn't execute it because they couldn't hear it. Such was the level of noise. In his ruling ordering the imprisonment of the two women, the judge said that the recording or a transcript could not capture the atmosphere caused in the courtroom by their intense and venomous interruptions. They were truly exceptional, and it had to be seen to be believed, their behaviour, he said. And there was no defence for their actions. They were clearly in contempt of court. And a very interesting remark he made. He said it was long past time for the court to call a halt to this family circus.
I think there's a lot of people that have been reading your coverage of the Burkes who would probably agree with that last comment from the judge. Would you agree with how chaotic that was? Because you've been in these court proceedings before where the Burkes, members of the Burke family, have caused disruption. Was it exceptional in this circumstance?
It's exceptional relative to how people should behave in the courtroom. Was it the worst interference? Probably not. I do recall being in the Court of Appeal one day where there were extraordinary scenes. Guards ended up pouring into the court, drag out various family members, and they were holding onto desks, and there was benches nearly toppling over, and so on. So yeah, it's extraordinary behaviour. But is it the most extraordinary altercation? Maybe not. Maybe it's not. But it's the one that landed the two ladies in jail, or will land the two ladies in jail whenever Gardaí can find them.
Could this be the last time that we see the Burkes in court in person?
Certainly some members of the family. So the judge said he was considering making an order that neither Martina Burke nor Ammi Burke nor Isaac Burke, who's a brother of Enoch Burke, can attend future hearings in person. So if he makes this order, they would basically be able to attend online, remotely. There's the court system has quite a sophisticated video link system now where people can observe court proceedings, from their home or wherever via a laptop or a computer. But it also allows the court to mute their microphones, so they can't be heard. They won't be able to interject or interrupt. And that seems to be a situation that Mr. Justice Cregan would welcome, that they have a level of access where they can watch and listen, but they can't interfere with the proceedings that are going on. And so he has given them 3 weeks in which to file legal submissions if they wish to object to that proposed order. But failing that, I think we'll see this order brought in 3 weeks' time.
Enoch Burke appeared via video link, but he and the judge had quite the exchange of words as well.
Yeah, things have been increasingly combative between Enoch Burke and Mr. Justice Brian Cregan. Enoch Burke clearly doesn't trust the judge and has accused him of all sorts, really, Tabitha. But on the last day, he described it as a fearful and nefarious judgment. He told Mr. Justice Cregan that he was not a good man, that there was a higher judge, and that he would give account to God, basically. So he was basically saying that, Mr. Justice Cregan would be standing before God someday and would have to account for his actions. The judge responded saying, don't threaten me, Mr. Burke. And he also ordered the muting of Mr. Burke's microphone at various points during the hearing. And aside from those exchanges, Tabitha, there was kind of, the judge kind of touched on this issue of, their religious fervor. So, the Burkes, as we know, they're fundamentalist Christians. They've been described as that. They've been described as evangelical Christians, and they basically placed their views above the views of other people that maybe don't hold these fundamentalist Christian views. The judge said at one point in his ruling that we live in a democracy governed by the rule of law, not a theocracy governed by the Burke family. He said there could be no exception for Christian evangelicals or other types of protesters, such as anti-abortion protesters or animal rights protesters in terms of how they behave in a courtroom. He said the law applies equally to all persons who seek to deliberately interrupt court proceedings and seek to disrupt them. So showing there that he has absolutely no truck with people justifying their behaviour on the basis of religion.
On the politics side of things, Shane, we're very much looking towards Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, going over to Washington, D.C. Obviously, there will be the White House visit, going to the Oval Office. But part of his programme when he goes over to D.C. is the Ireland Funds Gala. And people will remember last year, Isaac, Ammi and Martina Burke, they protested at the Ireland Funds dinner. But probably this year, it's less likely that we will see Martina and Ammi, for the very reason that we are talking to you for this podcast today, in that both Martina and Ammi are facing 2 weeks in prison. Can you tell us where we're at with that now?
They would be committed to the Doka Centre at Mountjoy, would be the committal prison for contempt of court. I think if there was to be an attempt by those two particular members of the Burke family to go back to Washington this year, then they'd have to come out into the open and they'd be spotted at an airport, and the guard would know that there is an order out there for their arrest and committal to prison. So I think it's unlikely that we'll see a repeat of that, of those scenes in Washington again.
We had the Mountjoy Governor John Lonergan. He predicted the pair would find prison a culture shock. What do we know? What will detention look like for Martina and Ammi?
Yeah, I think John Lonergan's comments were very interesting. He said that the experience of incarceration is currently significantly worse than in previous years due to overcrowding in prisons. I think he was saying that, between, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they would have been guaranteed a single cell and the privacy that comes with that. But nowadays, they certainly won't be guaranteed a single room or single cell occupancy. And he thought it'd be a shock to their system. And I suppose treated like other prisoners, where they'd have to double up or triple up or whatever arrangements would have to be made for them.
Shane, finally, being witness to the conduct of the Burkes in court, do you think the 2-week stint for Ammi and Martina might be a deterrent for them now, conducting themselves in the way that they have?
No, I don't. I think they've demonstrated, their contempt for societal norms in courtrooms, contempt for the orders made by the court. I don't see them having, this situation where they suddenly, see the light and say, oh yes, the courts are right and so on. They're way too firm in their views, and I don't think they will be knocked off course. What I actually think it will be more effective is this proposed order that they can't actually physically come into courtrooms anymore. I think that will be more effective than the 2 weeks in prison, because if they're not in the courtroom and if they are only allowed to attend online and that they can be muted online, then we just won't have those interruptions.
Yeah. Shane Phelan, thank you.